In part 1 of this series, we looked at Max Holloway. Now let's focus on his adversary, Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega is currently undefeated in his professional mixed martial arts career, and is perhaps one of the most feared submission artists in the sport today, with a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Renan Gracie. Let's take a closer look at Brian Ortega's game. Before we get into examining the submission game of Brian Ortega, let's take a look at his stand-up game. Let's take a look at his stance. In all of his fights, Brian Ortega likes to use a square stance as opposed to a bladed stance. In this clip, you'll see Brian Ortega standing very square against Clay Guida. Now, the advantages of having a square stance is that, as you see in this clip, Brian Ortega is able to shift between stance laterally, performing the V-step. This enables him to access a wider variety of strikes from both the open and closed stance engagements. The mechanics behind a powerful left hook is through the rotation motion of your hips and through to the left hooking arm. Scientifically speaking, the more distance there is between you and the opponent as you are generating the torquing motion of the hook, the more power will be generated, as long as you don't hook at a target past your center line. Simply speaking, if power was to be generated from the lead hook, it is best to be throwing the punch from a square stance rather than a bladed stance. The left hook is such a devastating punch. Historically, boxers such as Joe Frazier, Tommy Morrison, Sugar Ray Robinson, Floyd Patterson made a living out of the left hook. As you can see, against Brett Tavares, Ortega was landing the left hook all night long, and finally dings him with the left and sends him crashing down onto the mat. In defense against oncoming strikes, Brian Ortega likes to use the shoulder roll, also known as the Philly shell. The shoulder roll is often used in a close stance engagement. Here we see Brian Ortega using it in defense against Brett Tavares. As Tavares throws his rear hand, Ortega tucks his chin in behind his lead shoulder and rolls with the punch. However, Brian Ortega is very 50-50 with this move, as the Philly shell actually works better when you're in a more bladed stance. If anyone wants to learn more about the Philly shell, please watch Floyd Mayweather. He was a master at defense with this move. Put this in your memory banks and we'll talk about it more in the next video. Now let's take a look at Ortega's grappling. In this footage, you see Brett Tavares posturing up inside Brian Ortega's full guard in order to hit Brian Ortega with some ground and pound. First thing to notice is Brian Ortega's posture from the bottom. Ortega bridges his hips, effectively bringing his posture to his opponent, as he cannot control the posture of Tavares. Notice how Ortega has his foot placed on the left-hand side of the hips of Tavares. This sends the signal to Tavares that Ortega is attacking his left arm posting on the mat. But Ortega opts to land the elbow on the right-hand side of Tavares' head instead. And again, landing the elbow to the same side. And if you freeze it here, you see Brian Ortega has now shifted that foot onto the right hip in position to attack the right arm of Tavares, which is now posted on the mat. In this position, Ortega attempts yet another elbow on the same side. But the difference is this one is a fake elbow, and this fake elbow actually serves to trap the right arm of Brett Tavares that was posting on the mat. From here, Ortega swings his leg over the head of Tavares and bites down on the armbar. Ortega hit this series of transitions against Diego Brandao. From a standing scramble, Ortega secures the standing head and arm position, locking in the hand on the biceps. From here, Ortega rolls through to the anaconda. As he walks his hips towards Diego Brandao, tightening up the choke, it was possible that Brandau's left shoulder is not tucked in tight enough for Ortega to secure the finish. The specifics of the Anaconda choke I'll cover in the next video. Keeping the same grip, Brian Ortega takes the mount. And in the process of taking the mount, Ortega tries to readjust his grip to hit an arm-in guillotine. Brandau successfully defends this with his left arm flaring out his elbows and preventing Ortega's hands from clasping together. And as Ortega transitions to the one-arm mounted guillotine, with that same free hand, digs it under his own neck, relieving the pressure of the guillotine. And here's the good part. As Brandau attempts to create space by pushing on the head of Ortega, as you can see here, Ortega blocks the elbow. So now Brandau's arm cannot be retracted as Ortega shifts his weight and rolls through for the triangle. That elbow block is a very important detail. And here's the even better part. As Brandau comes up on his feet in order to stack Brian Ortega to defend the triangle, Ortega is already moving his left arm in anticipation of this and grabs a hold of Brandau's leg even before his feet touch the mat. And by doing that, Ortega really secured the angle for the finish. And that is a very tight triangle. Just beautiful jiu-jitsu. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but let's take a quick look at some of the other things that Brian Ortega does.